Okay. I'd like to welcome our final speaker for today. Our final speaker is Graham Marshall from Pro-Social Place as part of the University of Liverpool. His presentation will be called An Exploration of Placekeeping from the Fireplace to the Whole Place. Graham Marshall is a landscape architect and urban designer with extensive experience across all scales of urban design, from strategic planning to detailed design. He leads the social enterprise Pro-Social Place, which focuses on the relationship between community wellbeing and place design, and is also a visiting senior research fellow at the University of Liverpool. So I think I'm going to invite you up, Graham.
Thanks, Amanda. I had some questions for Vicky, but I had my talk in my head at the same time, and I'm going to cover some of the same things. So hopefully, we'll in between us, we'll stimulate some questions from that. So thanks for having me. Apologies from my co-director, Rhiannon Corcoran. She's in another event within JMU today, talking about ACEs, which are. Well, I can't remember what ACEs are now, I do know, but they're acute childhood events. So that's a very huge discussion going on down in town. So what we've done is I put a film up first. It's 10 minutes long, so I'm going to sit down after I get it running. But she's presenting within that film as well. So that starts with fire. The fire you can see on the screen here is the claimed biggest bonfire in Britain. Over on the Wirral, just across the water from us here. Yang will be aware of this, it is online today. So for communities, fire is still quite important, but for different reasons than where we started off in caves. So, how do I...
Humans have been harnessing fire for thousands of years. It was a long and convoluted process. Fire is a nexus of human evolution. It makes us who we are. I actually arrived in evolutionary anthropology through the world of bushcraft, which was gathering with friends in beautiful woodlands like this and practicing these primitive skills. Fire was always one of those things that drew everybody in because it's very hard to do. It requires a lot of input from a friend, so it becomes a very sociable thing. And then at the end of that long, hard day of learning how to do that, you get this lovely fire that you can sit around with your friends and cook your meals. It creates social bonds in its construction, and then we consume it socially as friends on an evening.
We have a little clue, really. Some Australian hawks actually have an awareness of fire to the point that they will pick up a stick and then drop a burning stick somewhere else to create fire. If they can do it, I think it's highly likely the early hominins could do it. Once they could see there was an advantage to going with fire, moving with fire, then they might extend it to other places. And they might see that by holding a burning stick, they could keep it going and move it.
The question is, what was fire being used for? And it's certainly the case certain kinds of foods are much more digestible if you cook them. So root vegetables and red meat in particular. That capacity to get more out of, more energy out of each bite you take is going to be very valuable in allowing you to acquire all the extra energy needed to grow a big brain. But also, it allows us to extend the working day into the dark, the night time. They can spend more time feeding themselves partly, but more especially chatting around the fire. And I think chatting around the campfire probably was crucial in allowing them to have such big social groups as they eventually had.
Everybody who's ever sat around campfires has experienced that unique social life that comes alive. That very novel social experience of both creating fire together as a group and also sitting around it.
Fire, I think, is unusual in being quite as multisensory as it is. Obviously, we see it, we feel its warmth, sometimes we feel its burn, we smell it, and we hear it, of course. The crackling of a fire is really quite soothing. That fullness of a multisensory experience brings a coherence to the self and enables us to embody the experience that we're having. And when you add in your own sort of embodied multisensory experience in combination with the other people who are also around the fire, you've got something really quite special going on.
I've missed this so much.
Yeah.
This is the tribal life.
Yeah. One of the important features of firelight is precisely the fact that it's inconstant, so it's constantly flickering and the light levels are changing. But in the evening, what it creates is this sort of magical theatre, which makes all the storytelling we do that much more magical. And I think that is actually why we do almost all our socialising in the evening rather than at lunchtime. Even at the weekend, if it's a meaningful social thing, then we always seem to go in the evening. You go to the theatre in the evening, you go to the pub in the evening. It's just a different kind of atmosphere. I think that really just goes back to 400,000, maybe more, years of experience living our lives with fire.
I would say that there is a real lack of fire in communities and people's households, and I think young people aren't really exposed to it. I think the exposure they have to fire could just be a kid in school who's got hold of a lighter and they're lighting up a deodorant can, which is obviously incredibly dangerous. Seeing something burns on the side of the road, like a scooter that's been stolen and set on fire, or some kids have found litter and they've started a fire with that. But in terms of actually lighting fires themselves, I don't think that they really have much of an experience with fire at all.
I think we've been through a phase, especially in the West in the last 100 years, of building fire out of our lives. If you go back to Victorian times, then fire was everywhere. But architects really came to the view that you don't need to have fireplaces in every house. Many flats or apartments don't have a fireplace at all. And the idea is that we could do without it. But it does seem that there's something in us that makes us want fire. So there are lots of little things, the way people light candles, the religious involvements with fire. The most recent one in the last year or two has been festival times like Christmas. People have discovered that they can run a fire on their television screen, and last Christmas apparently this was one of the most popular uses of social media.
I'm not saying to just building up a load of pressure and pulling that out fast. And when we're not using it, it goes right back in the sheet. Mallet goes in the dominant hand. We're just going to position it so it's parallel to our torso. And we're just going to give it a gentle tap.
Yeah, I found a lot of positive outcomes from these sessions. There's a particular kid who I hear when he's at home is a totally different child and unrecognisable. You know, he's very kind of self-abusive. But when he's in the sessions, he's, you know, super happy, boisterous, running around, really polite. If he doesn't like the food, you know, he's like, I'm really sorry, but I don't like it. I hope that doesn't upset you. And you can see how much of a kind, caring kid, but his mum would tell me about what he's like in school and how they just see him as a nuisance and a problem. And it's just beautiful to see how just being in an outdoor environment with someone supporting and facilitating and meeting their needs and, you know, reading their cues can have such an amazing impact to the point that you wouldn't even think it's the same person that you're hearing about.
Actually, I've not been there with it.
I didn't.
I made fire.
How have you found doing it? It's fun.
Good.
It's not that hard.
I should have done
How does sort of sitting next to the fire like make you feel?
Like warm. You never really see them ever. Yeah. You don't get to interact with fire much. That is a shame.
I enjoy being around the fire because it makes me feel like I'm like part of nature.
There is a generation of people who will never have experienced a real fire in the outdoors. And this is why interventions like forest school become so important. But what would they be missing by not having that? I think people who've experienced that will know what they miss. The young people themselves, and they're likely young people, aren't they? Probably wouldn't know what they were missing. They would have no awareness of what fire does. But it's an absolute shame.
It's hard to know where we're going with evolution, but I would say we haven't evolved beyond our need for fire. We're still biologically probably reliant on cooked food. It still integrates with almost every technology that we work with today. But more importantly, I still think it has a role to play in getting people to come together in a very special, focused space to be humans again.
Well, that's shutting down. A shout out to Molly, who's an MA student of the University of Liverpool, one of Rhiannon's students, and also other folks on the We're Running the Forest School as well. So there's lots of things for us to work on in the future. You know, taking this symposium forward into action and putting people together. So that's the fireplace. That is the original kitchen. That's where we all started to come together, grow our brains and become more social beings and be able to expand into the city living that we have today. But the question that was coming up in that film is, have we lost our connection with fire? The question I might ask, or might not ask at the end is, how do we put the fire back in our lives? So, first slide sort of introduces into whole place, and what I'm going to be talking about here is being social, but particularly being pro-social. So pro-social is an evolutionary thing. It's not especially human. It's about social species working together to protect each other, to be able to feed each other, to be able to raise young together, and to be able to prevail, as Darwin says. And it's about the survival of the fittest, not necessarily the strongest, but the fittest and the most adaptable of people. Pro-sociality, in the context of that, what does pro-sociality mean? It's about behaviour that we do, that we don't have to do, but we choose to do, that benefits others. And it's not necessarily a direct cost to us, but it's just things we do. But there's three aspects to that. The first is altruism, so there's the indirect cost. Well, that's the basis of evolution. The second one is empathy, and it's interesting to hear the other speakers. There are two things that are interesting in this sphere, in this discussion. Something that other speakers brought up through the talks, but also in the symposium. I, including myself, there are 3 men here, the majority of people are women, and that's where the empathic approach to life comes in, where there is a spectrum here between systemizers and empathizers, and women are largely on the empathizing end. If you want to think about a systemizer woman, think of Margaret Thatcher, and you get a sense of where we are on those on spectrums. But that is the basis of culture. And that's a really important thing that I think has come from the other speakers, is the basis of most of these cultures we talked about today have been led by women. But the third aspect of it is about cooperation, and that's us all working together and acting together. Well, that is the basis of well-being. We all need well-being. If we're going to forage for anything in the world, it's not necessarily just food. The thing that nourishes us most is well-being, and there's 2 different ways of finding well-being. We find it working together as a society, as a culture, as a community, as a family, and that holds people together throughout our life. And the other, if there's an absence of being able to do that, it's called hedonic well-being. That's going out and just buying some fried chicken because it makes us feel good. So the fast food kind of culture that we have, well, that leads to alcohol, leads to drugs and sex and risk-taking and a whole bunch of other things that are necessary. They're not bad, they're not wrong, they're normal behaviours in a harsh environment, but they're not very sustainable. You don't necessarily live very long by following those kinds of behaviours. So the thing that's got to hold us together and make sure that we are sustainable and survive is eudaimonic well-being. And where it works, where pro-sociality works, is there have been a series of fairly significant disasters over the last few decades. So, as it's hot today and everybody's concerned about heat in Europe, there was a deadly heat wave in Chicago. But Robert Sansom, who was a criminologist actually, but he went out and studied populations, and he just swung his research into this area when this heat wave took place, and he's followed on with Kobe, the tsunami, the hurricane, and all the other kinds of events that have really caught people unawares. He said that the life and death aspect of that was actually pro-sociality, so it's not about design, it's not about beautifully laid out bits of cities. It's about the structure of cities that enables communities to be able to work together, to look out for each other. So some of the illustrations you see in Hurricane Sandy are the remote shopping malls, you know, the really scruffy little ones that have jeeps pulling up outside them, and they're all boarded up with nails and with signs on saying "Looters Shop." So that's an immediate thing that you can see in that landscape. Whereas in other places, you didn't have to board up a shop because everyone was looking after the shopkeeper who was looking after somebody else, and the community held themselves together really, really well. So pro-sociality is really strong for our survival. So you talk about migrants or refugees, there's a thing that pulls them together often is the pro-sociality of helping each other that helps them survive. So now I want to move on to pro-social design and take it outside of the kitchen into the place. And there are different ways of working around a place. Places need identity, and people need identity within places need to matter, and people need to matter as well. That was an interesting thing when you introduced me early on as well. You said it's pro-social space. Every time I go anywhere at all, introduces pro-social space. But on here, places are spaces with meaning. So that's what we call pro-social place. Because we try to have it. No, it's not a problem because it does it. And I thought, should we change the name? I thought, no, let's stick to it because that's an important nuance in there. But the other speakers have all, at some point in their talk today, also talked about it being relational. The kitchen is relational, food is relational, but actually all of our lives are relational, and the design of places are relational. And the little thing down there from Demos in their survey, and I ask questions every time I go out somewhere. I won't do it today, but how important is the public realm? 85% of people would say it's the quality of space has a direct impact on their lives. I would say the other 15 haven't thought enough about it yet. We'll probably come around to that idea that it probably does, because the poor quality of space isn't good for you. Nature, everybody talks about nature at the moment because they're finding places really harsh, but they just want to plant trees, but without any understanding of the spirit of trees and the importance of trees. So there's a cultural disconnect with nature through that. People would say, yes, we want more biodiversity, but I don't want wasps in my house or spiders or this, or that, those sorts of things. But biodiversity is incredibly important to make sure that our crops get pollinated and we don't starve to death. There's a knock-on to that. The sound of gulls is also really important because we live in Liverpool and you can hear them now. It tells you about the place that you're in. If you go into the middle of England, you'll hear crows. It's those sorts of things. It's better to listen to nature. But pro-social design is interspecies. Being pro-social is about interspecies. It's about us looking after those things as well. It's about diversity. So there's a need for a sense of belonging without all being the same. So it's about difference. And we have a real problem at the moment. There's a racist noise all over social media at the moment, and I think it's a very small number of people with a loud voice, and they don't understand the importance of difference. And again, today, through all the speakers, the things we can learn from each other, differences are really important. But also in the way that we design cities, or housing estates, or buildings, is that if we don't have diversity in that, this is just down the road, this is Runcorn, this is the guy that gave his name to the Sterling Prize, is fabulous Newtown at Holton Lee, that was demolished within 20 years of being built because it was a machine for living and it put a certain kind of person in there, and the only thing that they had in common was their poverty. They didn't have interests or anything like that. Religious people put them in there. You can't be pro-social within a place like that. We need a mixture of people that become a melting pot of being able to help each other because there's different skills and different experiences in the world to do that. The public realm is also a contested space. So if we think of, I'm just thinking the UK at the moment, but probably many other Western cities, Chinese cities too, Asian cities too, they're dominated by vehicles, mostly private cars. That's the whole public realm. But I know in the UK that 80% of every town or city, 80% of the public realm is highway space. We've got some parks dotted around, but most of the space where we need to come together as soon as we open our front door and step out into the public realm to meet others is highway space. And within that space, there's risk aversion, which starts to separate things out. If we get autonomous vehicles everywhere, you can't have people just stepping out in front of them and making them brake all the time. So we're going to have to segregate even more. We're going to have corrals everywhere where you can and can't walk. So the whole of the public realm is going to be simplified and simplified and simplified to such an extent we won't be able to work together at all. What makes the public realm work is negotiation. It's about taking turns. It's about saying after you, or what should we do in this space? And for kids to do their thing over there and older people here and somebody else in between do that, to be able to share spaces as well. Green and grey, so everybody wants everything green at the moment, but they also want to take over the grey and get rid of vehicles. Now when I look at black and white photos of 1940s, 50s, 20s Britain put up on social media, everyone says, oh, wasn't it better back in the day? Just look at that. There's no clutter and mess and everything looked after. It was also quite open as well. That public realm wasn't cluttered with things. But now if we take cars out of the place, we seem to want to then clutter it up and not have this open tablet where anyone can go and do anything spontaneously. So for pro-sociality to work, for communities to come together, it can't be all about the park, but somehow you're transported from your house with your eyes closed, you don't look at the awfulness of all the streets you've got to go through, the dangers in there, and you land in a park, and then that gives you good well-being. It's also not about being entertained either, so you can't take the public realm and just put stuff on. You need to participate. Perhaps it'd be better for all those people who are playing their own instruments and not watching somebody else do it. But the other thing we heard about as well is food culture being homogenised and standardised. So all across London now, building into all our major cities, there's the idea of street food, which is entrepreneurs thinking up things they can wrap in bread and sell you as an ethnic something or other, but it's all the same gyro wherever you go. It's the same sort of stuff. That's not participation, that's not people going out for food, that's people consuming. So the whole of this thing here is about consuming the park or consuming the street space, of commercialising street spaces with street cafes. But where do the children play? Is an important question to ask on that. So that brings us to active and adaptable places. So this is some work we did in Yangzhou, where we find that every citizen in Yangzhou is no more than a 10-minute walk away from a space. But some of those spaces are undercrofts and motorways. But the whole place flows. There's just a flow in Yangzhou throughout the whole of the public realm, where people come and gather of all ages, and this age group will go away, and then a younger age group might come in the evening and do things. It's about fulfilling your human purpose in space, and it's about community. So that brings us back to the whole fire of how we started off life as coming together around fire. We need something to come back together. So I'll have two questions around how do we put the fire back in our lives. The first one is, how are we doing for time? I've probably stolen lots of time, haven't we? Because we've stolen a bit as well. So if we break up and have a mini workshop then, I'll just ask here, what do you like about where you live? If anyone wants to shout out.
It's accessible to different shops where I can get some of the African foods that I like. And it's a busy community. I don't like an environment whereby it's too quiet, too busy, but it's a mixture of both. So those are the two things I like about it.
Yeah, that's good.
Access.
Access.
Yeah, I live in the city centre, so you know, I look out my window one way, I can see John Lewis, look out the other way, I can see the Anglican. You know, I'm 5 minutes walk from Central Station, which takes me everywhere I want to go. Lime Street, the bus station, I like the accessibility. Plus the green space all around.
Yeah.
You know, it's surprisingly green, that part of town where I live, Roadwalks. Yeah. Surprisingly green, yeah.
So it's access to resources.
Resources too, you know,
Yeah.
shops and
but the green space,
the river,
people,
transport, everything, it could be better.
I like the fact that it's really dense where I live, so even though it's in what is, South Liverpool, that all the streets are really tight terrace streets, and we've got loads of neighbours, we're really close together, we kind of, and then we've got a big park across the road, but actually in physical proximity, they are two up, two down, they're really sort of small houses, and there's a lovely kind of, that's what I love about it, the kind of neighbourly feeling.
Yeah, I love the neighbours as well, because my kid, we were living in an apartment in Istanbul, I lived in 10th floor for all 20 years, and then I moved to 5th floor in a different apartment. So I love the context of having very close to the ground. I feel grounded more. And we have the garden. And also children can play on the street, which is, I think, amazing, like my childhood.
Yeah.
So that's really fun.
It's also different feeling being in town and being a little bit outside of town. I live in Allerton, so it's like, I like the community there. But whenever I'm in town, there are so many resources here that I can use, but and also green spaces.
Yeah.
It's very accessible. Parks, green here.
Anybody online? No. Opinion. Okay. So that's what do you like about where you live? My second question is, what makes a good place to live? Slightly different question.
Where you have access to basic amenities, park, stores, schools, health centers.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure, basically.
Yeah. So both of those pictures I've kind of shown at home. First one had a context to it. You've talked about neighbourhood, and this one zooms in even more to the internal space and the kitchen. So, what makes a good place to live?
Family.
That's short for that. No, but it's interesting that you started talking about just how important the context of the neighbourhood is. Because if you don't have that, the home isn't really that much of a sanctuary. So let's just say we've got a brilliant neighbourhood. So what does our sanctuary look like?
It's interesting. I think earlier in the week when we had some discussions, our sanctuary, I think in England, our sanctuary is the land that we own somehow. It's our bit of land. But I think in other regions or other countries, it's about how you invite people in and how you share things together. So for me, it's the fact that, you know, I leave my front door open. Like this morning, I got up and the first thing I did was open the front door to let the cold air in. But that's, a lot of our neighbours do that. We just leave the front door open. And that's something that is quite traditional in Britain, but in our little area, we can still do that. So, trust.
Yeah.
It's because you feel secure. Security is really important.
Yeah.
You can't feel, it can't be a good place to live if every time you go indoors, you're looking over your shoulder. You don't feel secure.
So the security comes from trust.
Well, exactly. You know, and community.
Yeah.
You know, if you know your community around you, and you're of a communal disposition, then and your surrounding, your associates are,
So the communal disposition, that's an interesting phrase, and I think that's what I'm talking about in terms of being pro-social.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're under too much stress, sometimes you can't be pro-social. You might be social and socialise with people, but being pro-social is looking out for people. So Amanda will be looking out for people going in through a neighbour's doors that shouldn't be, and vice versa. So you have the pro-social. Yeah.
It comes back to altruism that you spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
Feeling belong to somewhere, or maybe integration, feel being there, being accepted by the community that you're in, even though you're from another country, kind of thing. But inside the house, it's the practicality, the functional. It has to be functional. The spaces in my house, but again, it's important that the outside of the house, the community, whatever is around, it's more important than because you can still, at the end of the day, you can still work in the house to make it more functional for you, but outside is more important.
Yeah. So you naturally control the inside of your house, but the outside sometimes isn't. I know there's some other research I've looked at where in the Middle East, under particular regimes or under particular war-like circumstances, you have absolutely no control of what's going outside. And it makes the inside as essentially even more important. It's cleaner, it's even more organised, it's more welcoming to people coming in because
more
you can't
personal, more private.
Yeah.
Feeling part of something. Feeling part of something.
Yes.
Shelter's always been a priority. Above water and above food, look for shelter first.
Yeah.
Otherwise the other things are not always possible.
Yeah. And then the fire.
And then the fire.
But you need to find that place where you're going to have it. You're going to shelter yourself, and then you light a fire next to it. Just I'll stop in a second and just open it up to questions. But there's an observation at the end of this that I have, and it comes. My co-director Rhiannon, she either is or was the wellbeing lead for the University of Liverpool, and one of her colleagues kind of works in the front line of student pastoral care, and an awful lot of the the well-being issues that freshers have when they arrive at college is that they've lived a life in a bedroom with their own TV and their own computer, their own control of their own space. They come to college and they go into shared accommodation and they don't know how to share. They don't know how to negotiate. And that is causing real life mental health issues for them, and that's what's taking them into that office. It's causing them real stress. And it's initially put down to, oh, they're away from home for the first time. But digging into it, it wasn't just being away from home. Most of them could probably cope, you get on with it, you can cope with that. It was being away from home and out of control, and not being able to control their space. So there's something that we're losing, at least within British homes, in terms of how we are living within these sanctuaries. We've made cells, we've made prisoners of ourselves in our homes. So that's my final comment. I think we need to put the fire back into houses to pull families together first to be able to pull communities together.
Well, the furniture used to be set out years ago before there was a TV around the fire.
Yeah.
Now it's all set out around the telly or whatever the visual thing is.
Even if you put a fire scene on a TV now, we'll argue about which fire scene to put up.
No, please say
I'll say that. You can jump in.
No, thank you. I mean, thank you. What I think you did there was, with very few slides, you got the whole room discussing and engaged in what we were kind of talking about, and I think that that was really good. So thank you.
And hopefully that pulled all the other talks
layered
through that.
From my point of view, when we bought our house, the first thing that we did was we ripped out the gas fire and we put a proper fire in. But and that's it. The fire thing is our, and when we go to our allotment, the fire is, central to kind of what we do. And I think that what you've done is we've had some, we'll come to the further discussions, but from really interesting international examples, bringing something back to our Liverpool city region, and thinking about kind of what we are doing and how we are becoming cellularised here, and what the implications of that are, and what we crave, what we need, not just for kind of migrant communities, but also for any community, I think, which is a nice kind of context. But I think that you were kind of talking about creating an identity and forming an identity, and I know some of our previous speakers have talked about this, kind of remembering identities, but you were moving towards forming identities in the home, and how the structure of our cities can help to look after each other. And that fire, that idea of ovens or cooking spaces. So, Elisa, Pelin had the lovely image of the bread ovens, and then Vicky had the lovely bread. So the idea of breaking bread and making bread is something that's run through a lot of the presentations, and so that fire and that oven and how we kind of go, well, it's not just about the cell, it's about how you bring that fire back into a kind of an urban context. I think is a really interesting one. So thank you so much. I'm going to ask if there's any questions.
I just wanted to add about fire, because not this week has been too hot. Last week at home we did barbecue maybe 5 times because it was the weather. Leading to this week, which is this week, I'm not even going out. But also after one barbecue, we were even, the family basically, we were just watching the scene event and burning a lot of wood, and that becomes a theatrical social activity for like hours, and drinking beers until dark time. Just super simple fire, just at home, just in our small garden, and then it's just.
In the film, they were talking about the noise, because in other presentations we've talked about objects, we've talked about smells, we've talked about memories, but then that in the film it was the crackling and the sound, and how that sound can just transport you.
It's the whole. It's living is a whole package. You can't break it down between you live in a nice house and you go to a park, and that's all the government needs to do for you. And we're going to give you some cafe culture. It's rich. It's got to be rich.
And you have to have finances to access those. You can't access those you can't get over the threshold of those places without, without financial resource. And I think that on Monday we were looking at, Birge, you showed an example of a community oven in Turkey, and that idea that it doesn't cost. You have access to something. and that bringing the people together. And, you know, Aminat, again, you talked about the idea of these houses that were kind of based around and everyone having access to a shared space in the middle, you know, so having, you know, very small, maybe kitchen spaces, but actually the shared space in the middle that, you know, you didn't have to try to come together. It's just what you're doing.
In Turkey, in a small rural village, for instance, it is either the water that connects, like a fountain, because people collect water and wash clothes and everything, or it is the oven, so it's fire. So it's just there are the connections, and that is all the public space is organized around that. So to see if that was source of water or it was fire.
I've heard stories about this country and other places in Europe where the only oven in the village was the baker. Everyone took their pots of dinner down to the baker's on a Sunday, and he'd cook them in his oven. It was the only oven in town. So there's, you know, it's not so dissimilar to what you're saying. You know.
Lisa.
I used to live in Sweden for about 8 years before I moved here, and in a town called Gothenburg, and basically so many of the apartment buildings, they were square, built around the courtyard, and we had in our building a communal laundry that most people used. So it was a big room with washers, sort of industrial strength washing machines, and a big room for sort of drying things. You could just hang it up and turn on the heat, and the whole room would get hot. And everybody signed up for the laundry. And then there was a sauna, a communal sauna, and a guest room with like a party room. So when my kids had, you know, birthdays and stuff, you don't have to have everybody in your apartment. You go to the party room, and there's a kitchen there, and you have guests coming to visit you, and people, family members can stay. I mean, it was, and everybody just took it for granted, right? And that's just how people live. And I was just, you know, it was just set up to like create, you know, this kind of community and interactions and to facilitate your life. And yeah, I really miss
that. Back home in Nigeria, while we're growing up, we used to cook with firewood whenever we have any occasion, and that brings, like you said, fire brings people together. I recall then when we used to have our social gathering, where neighbors would just come around and be like, "What do you want me to do for you? What can I do?" And some would go about to get firewood if the ones were using is being exhausted, and some will actually keep an eye on what is going on, if the fire is burning out from what we are cooking. And like what you said, while you played the video about the campfire, it gave me kind of a nostalgic feeling. I never had the opportunity to have a campfire back home because there's this myth that you can get burnt or something that they always scare us off from getting ourselves involved in campfire. So the only time we have that fire is when we have the social gathering, when parties is going on. People from different houses will just come around. Oh, they're having a celebration there. Everybody comes around. Some will go as far as helping you to fetch water from the well if there's no water in the compound where we're cooking and all. And I just see fire as something campfire, like I see it as something I really want to explore and see how it's like. My little daughter used to have this imagination about having a marshmallow being burnt in the campfire. I'm like, it's not possible here in England. And another thing again I noticed, one of the things that drew my attention to England was while I was growing up, I used to see the fireplace in the house. We never had that in Nigeria where I'm from because our temperature there is kind of very well the same. So when I got to England, I think I was, how do I put it? What I was expecting was not what I saw. I didn't see the fireplace in the houses. I don't know what must have happened there. Is it evolution or combustion or cutting down of trees, or lack of trees? What has happened? What has changed that has made the fireplace not in the houses again?
I think it's technological improvements that people, it's a dirty, you know, kind of, because I remember making the fire for my gran every morning. You had to lay the fire up and take the ashes out, and you know, and so when I used to make the firelighters out of old newspaper, but when
you know, kind of when the advent of gas boilers and underfloor, you know, radiators and central heating.
Whole house heating.
Whole house heating, we kind of needed fires less. But it is, I mean, it is a nostalgic view of what we have, and that's something that I really value. Well, we live that, we have that, so.
So the question is, what's the new fire? Because if we all went out having bonfires now, we've said that we refound fires, we're going to accelerate global warming, right? I think. But what is the new fire? How do we?
The TV screen.
The TV screen. But how do we bring people together in a way? And commercialising high streets isn't it. We need to be thinking differently and thinking from a pro-social perspective. I also think we need to be working with young people and creating new citizens. You know, opening the world up to them and putting some freedoms back into the public realm, and people not having to ask consent or permission to do various things. I mean, there is an interesting thing, if you do literally talk about fire. I remember when I lived in London, this is going, well, a long time ago, and for a long time, but I think it was probably the mid-90s. We got an old camper van. I lived on the edge of London, worked in the centre of London, but it was a 15-minute train ride out to probably no stops. And I had one of the first mobile phones, and I could phone up the takeaway on the way back, pick up our camper van from the station with a load of friends, put the takeaway in the fridge in reverse, keeping it warm, and just drive straight out into Kent. But every time we went out there were lots of migrant families from the Middle East or Eastern Europe already there, but whole families, not a bunch of people in their 20s having a good time. It was like a whole family, and that was their Friday evening, and they were cooking, they brought barbecues and stuff. That's the first time I'd seen lots of other people kind of bringing a culture here that we used to have and that has gone away. If you go down to Okta's pool now in the summer, you'll find 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 whole families, generational families there, and most of them are not white. They're all sat in a house somewhere watching football. But what's needed down there are probably fire pits.
Spaces to enable it.
If we had 50 or 100 fire pits down there come along, maybe we could have a cultural change and more people come up because that's what you do.
You go to Australia and they have them. You know, they have them there
And
with firewood ready.
I've seen them. In Brisbane.
So it's like
I think the same in that here.
So it's not how you introduce fire back into the home, it's how you introduce fire back into the community. And what is the fire? Is it, you know,
So it's not the house, it's the place.
The place.
And that's what it is.
The space. Place, sorry.
Or make spaces places,
Yes. Indeed. So have we got any more questions? No, I think that was a really great discussion. Thank you. And thank you for your generous kind of sharing of thoughts and ideas.
If we do this again, I'll talk about Yangzhou, because I mentioned Yangzhou with the 10-minute walk and the underpass and things, but I went there on an accreditation trip, spent a week there, looking at all aspects of the city because they want to be the world's first self-care city. They can't afford primary care, and they can't afford for people to get so sick it cripples secondary care, so people want to be a self-care city, and a big chunk of that was around food and refinding their food culture. You know how we say, how are you today? That means have you got the plague in English? And their greeting in China is, have you eaten rice today? Because starvation was the problem. So there's a cross-cultural thing there. You'll find stuff from all around the world. But the whole of that culture was about that. But there's a fascinating thing in all developments have to have public community spaces. So every apartment block has to have really big spaces, and it's up to the community how they use those. So some of them, from a self-care perspective, have big comfy medical chairs where you can go get your blood pressure and things checked by someone who's a doctor or a medical person living in your thing. So it's a time banking type thing. Because if he comes gives his Saturday morning up checking everyone's blood pressure, the plumber can go fix his broken tap washer when he needs to. So that was built into that. So that was interesting. You talked about the perimeter blocks as well. They had quite a few developments like that where they were growing food communally within there as well. So I'll save that talk for another time
Thank you.
when we continue this series.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our speakers.